So in the last video, I filled you all in on my birth story from early labor to the delivery of my daughter. If you didn't watch that video, I had her standing up in the bathroom pretty suddenly. Labor had been about 4.5, 5 hours, but we did not expect her to come out so fast in the bathroom. So we caught her in the bathroom, sat on the toilet. She was covered in vernix. She looked like a little ghost, just covered in vernix. Started to cry pretty quickly. She was a little floppy at first, but pretty quickly kind of got that muscle tone, started wailing, which is always a comforting sound after you have a baby. You know, their like lungs are working, they're starting to breathe. And so we took a minute sitting there, and oh, one thing I forgot to share in the last video is right after her head comes out and I'm like standing up and her head is between my legs, my 8-year-old walks into the bathroom, looks between my legs, is horrified, and he says, "I knew that babies came out of the butt," because it looks like the head is coming out of my butt. And so now my 8-year-old is convinced that the babies come out of the butt. And then he quickly left because he was horrified by what he saw. Pretty quickly he came back though, and I have precious photos of my husband sitting on the floor in the bathroom. I'm in the background holding the baby, and my son is like holding my husband's head against his, almost like, because my husband was crying because he was so emotional, and so my son was comforting him. So while he was horrified, he was also just fascinated by the birth process, by his baby sister. So after she and I were somewhat settled, then we all like shuffled into the living room where we had laid out a waterproof pad and all this on. I have like a pretty big couch that's almost like a bed, and I'm like totally naked, baby covered in blood and vernix. And we lay down, they take our vitals, you know, make sure we're healthy. She's continuing to do great, starts nursing right away, which, you know, causes contractions that cause the placenta to come out. However, about 30 minutes after sitting there having contractions, my placenta still wasn't out. And I could tell my midwives were getting a little bit nervous because you don't want a retained placenta. But I just like did not have it in me to push. It's like, I just pushed this baby out. I do not want to push this placenta out. But seeing the worry on their face was like, okay, fine. And so I did a couple of pushes. The placenta is out. And I think at this phase, my brother's girlfriend is in here. She was taking video and photo, which was great. But I had a room full of people. My son was in here. My husband was sitting next to me. And I just realized in that moment how really I have no modesty. Laying there totally naked, an organ coming out of my body, everybody watching, I just didn't care. So for women that are nervous that they're gonna, you know, not want to be naked and be really concerned about who's in the room, that might absolutely be the case, but you also might surprise yourself and feel like, I could care less who sees me naked right now. I just don't care. So the placenta comes out, thank goodness. They really carefully check it to make sure it's fully intact, because if it's not fully intact, that means probably a piece is still in the uterus, possibly still attached to the uterus. And that can be really dangerous, because if there is all, obviously, or a piece of the placenta still attached to the uterus, it can't, or typically it doesn't contract back down, and it doesn't stop the bleeding, because after the placenta releases, open blood vessels are left behind, and they continue to bleed until the contractions in the uterus contract it back down to size and essentially close those open blood vessels. So it is really important that all of the placenta comes out. So the placenta is out, fully intact. My bleeding is slowing a bit. They're like pressing on my abdomen, which doesn't feel good, but it helps the uterus contract. My daughter breastfeeding also helps for those contractions to continue, which help the uterus contract back down to size. And I thought that was it with the placenta, but in the next video, I will tell you the twist in this story. The next thing that we do, so my daughter is still attached to the placenta, still attached through the cord, and instead of doing the clamping and cutting, we did a cord burning, which I'm going to do a video about and really get deeper into it, but essentially you hold 2 taper candles. You put the placenta over this box, and then hold 2 taper candles so the flame is hitting the cord from both sides, and it doesn't hurt the baby. The baby can't feel this at all. And it takes about 10-15 minutes, but essentially it cauterizes the cord and disconnects it from the placenta. The only bummer is you have kind of like a longish cord still attached to the baby, so that has kind of like wrapped in gauze, and it's kind of this like floppy thing on the belly button. But my midwives, what they said is typically the cord and the cord stump comes out faster when you do the cord burning, which was definitely true. I think that the cord, it came out after about 4 or 5 days, whereas with my son, it took about 2 weeks before that cord stump fell out. So something about cauterizing the cord instead of just clamping and cutting helped it dry out faster and fall out quicker. From there, we transitioned into my bedroom, or actually before that, I was able to take a quick shower, which was the best thing ever. I was able to pee. Oh wait, I'm forgetting the funnest part, my vaginal sutures. Right, so after the placenta comes out, they check my vagina, and sure enough, I have 3 tears. One of them is pretty big, and so I get 3 shots of lidocaine in the vagina. Not as bad as it sounds, just kind of like a sting, and I would much prefer those 3 stings than feeling stitches being put into my labia. And that's where my main tear was, on the side, on my labia. Whereas with my son, I tore at the bottom of the perineum, where most people tear. It's like where the skin is the most taut, but I tore on the side of the labia. So they stitch me up, and then finally I'm able to pee because I have a super full bladder. I have this weird thing where like I cannot pee when I'm in labor. Cannot pee, but of course people are constantly giving you water, so I had a really, really full bladder. That was a little bit nerve-wracking, but felt good. And if you've had a baby, you know that you can't wipe with toilet paper, especially if you've had stitches. So you have what's called a Parry Bottle. It's like this squirt bottle filled with warm water. But my midwives also put like this like herbal mix that almost looked like iced tea, and it has healing properties. It helps the vagina, everything heal. And it's usually the same concoction that you would get in a SIDS bath. And so a SIDS bath is this like water with this herbal mixture, and you essentially dunk your butt into it and let your vagina and your butt soak in it, and it helps everything heal. So I had that same mixture in my Parry bottle, squirted everything off, took a shower, which felt amazing. I mean, like granted, I showered sure like about 5 hours before that, but it felt like the best shower I've ever taken in my whole life because I was covered in sweat and blood and amniotic fluid and probably poop. So that was great. We transitioned to the bed. My baby's continuing to nurse. And my midwife is, kind of going through the list of things to look out for. She's like, their hands, their feet might get a little bit blue, but you certainly don't want like their torso or their lips to get blue. I'm like, okay, yeah. And I look down, and my baby's lips are blue. So I freak out, I pull her off the breast, and she gasps. My breast had essentially been smothering her. And so we kind of hang her on her side, and she is breathing, and her color comes back quickly, thank God. But I shouldn't laugh. I'm laughing because it was so scary, and I don't know what else to do. So look out for that. Be aware that when your breasts are really swollen, you want to make sure that at least one nostril can breathe. So what I started to do when my breasts were really full, when my baby was so small, I would kind of press on the breast to make sure that at least one nostril had access to oxygen. And when babies are brand new, their circulation, all of that can just be wonky. So while of course you want to let somebody know immediately if they are turning blue, it's not always like a severe emergency. Like in this situation, she was absolutely fine. I just needed to keep a closer eye on her. And yeah, checked everybody's vitals. She was exactly 7 pounds, 21 inches long. Beautiful, perfect little baby who I'll introduce you to in the next video.